Welcome to We Should Start a Podcast, the only podcast within a podcast. Each week, we'll attempt to create the next hit audio show as we pitch our brightest ideas for pods about anything and everything. But more often than not, pretty much nothing. I am your host, Podmaster and Commander Dino, and joining me, as always, are my good friends, Podmaster Chief Danderz, and Davey is here too, bringing up the rear. Let's get into it.
We should start a podcast.
Welcome to a very spooky episode of We Should Start a Podcast, where, for the month of Scare-tober, we are pitching only our most blood-curdling, spine-chilling, and terror-inducing podcast ideas with the hopes of becoming the final girls of the podcast industry. What do you think?
I like that.
Such a mild reaction.
I was expecting you to plan a spooky version of Get the Dog, to be fair. I thought we'd have Get the Ghost or something.
Okay, here we go. Wait.
Get the ghost,
Let's turn Get the Dog into a horror movie.
Get the dog, hurry up, get the dog.
Don't make a scene.
Get the dog, get the dog.
The dog turned out to be his other wife.
Very spooky.
That's funny. I like that.
I love Scare-tober. And who is it who loves Scare-tober? That's me on the mic, your boy, El Diablo Dino. Nothing to plug, really, except if this is your first time listening, please do not judge the podcast yet. It's usually not this dumb. Who do we have here in my screen in order? Up top left, we have Davey. Introduce yourself.
Davey. That's it.
That has to be the most base introduction I've ever heard.
A million things going through my head to say, and it all just came out at once.
Dave has had one improv class.
That was as far as they got in the first class.
Hasn't really quite grasped it.
I just got the introduction, and that was about it.
And we also have Danderz on my top right.
Hi, Dino.
How are you?
Yeah, good. Yeah, chilling. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm feeling spooky.
Yeah. It is scare season. I was going to say Spooktober. I mean, for those uninitiated in the it's not actually October yet while we're recording this, but it will be.
I bought a pumpkin yesterday. A gourd.
A big one or a little one?
A little one. Just a little ornamental gourd.
Yeah.
Are you going to go
do you
pumpkin
guys
patching?
do the bacon with pumpkin?
Let me address these questions one at a time. Davey, what did you ask?
Dave was very,
Are you gonna...
very curious and excited about the pumpkin
Shut
patching.
the fuck up, Alex. Are you going to go pumpkin patching?
Maybe. I want to go to like a big scary haunted house thing this year, or out in Abbotsford. I think they do a big like haunted cornfield thing.
Oh,
So that'd be cool.
that's pretty cool.
Might get you involved.
Yeah, sure. I've been to one out in Richmond. They have pumpkin patch and they have a cornfield as well, like right next to it. So you kind of do both, which is cool. Women love that shit. They love that shit.
And you know who doesn't love that shit? Danderz. Notorious scaredy cat. I saw when I was playing that spooky music at the start, I saw him like shivering a little bit.
Yeah. I was trying to jump straight into a reference from I Think You Should Leave on that haunted house segment where the ghost is covered in jizz or whatever, and I just couldn't remember the quotes well enough to jump straight in from
Do any of these fuckers ever bust out of the fucking wall and do like a huge messy shit? Or Dingleberry?
Yeah, not a scare fan. I just well, to be fair, it isn't the same culture in the UK and Ireland. Although Dave is obviously, I mean, we're all Irish, but
Yeah.
I know that in in North America they have a penchant for the spooky, whereas that doesn't really travel as well. You wouldn't find many of the haunted house things, and you know.
No, we have a haunted trail in Kerry down in
Is that right?
Goshel. Yeah, it's like a haunted. It's been going on for years. The locals.
That's where you trim your pubes into a little ghost. The haunted trail.
What the fuck?
Like a snail trail? No? Anyone?
No, it's for kids, Dino.
Yeah, okay.
This sucks.
This sucks.
But yeah, all the locals in Knocknagosh will take part in this haunted trail. It's cool.
Is
I did
that
it once or
based on
twice.
true spooky Kerry stories, or is it just made up?
No, it's just like maybe a kilometer or so, and you walk through it slowly in the dark, and you have various characters popping out of bushes, fellas with chainsaws but no chain in them and shit like that.
But what makes it spooky?
That's just like normal Kerry. They didn't plan that. That just happened.
This kilometer's good. Should we just use this space?
Do you know that Halloween is originating in Ireland?
Yes, I actually did know that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an old pagan festival called Samhain.
Yes, sir.
Fair play to the boys, huh?
Fair play to the boys. You're more of a Christmas guy, Danderz, and I'm not a Christmas person, really.
Yeah, I've always been that Christmassy elf, and I can understand more these days, where I used to kind of not have any understanding of the Halloween season. Like, it would easily just pass us by in my household. But the one thing I'll say, which I'm sure will come up in the podcast, is it's surely scare related, is like, I just don't understand. I just don't see any like value in being actually scared. Like, the whole kind of spooky sweet stuff is fine, just be spooky sweet, sure. What do they call it? There's like a word for
What's spooky sweet?
like, do you know the way Halloween Town, it's like it's based on spooky stuff, but it's kind of like kitschy and sweet. There's a word for like a portmanteau.
Yeah.
I can't remember. It's not a big deal.
I always call it fun spooky. And
Sorry,
Violet.
Your audio cut for me in the ears as you were speaking. Would you say again? Sorry,
I call it fun spooky, and that always gets me in trouble with Violet because I watch a lot of horror stuff. What's fun spooky for me has evolved a lot, and I think that like dumb slashers that are like kind of meant to be, a little bit tropey, like the Scream franchise, I think that's fun scary, and then Violet will watch it and be absolutely traumatized.
Whereas like if you took Scary Movie, that's like taken Scream and then literally made it a spoof.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? And so that's probably what she would still think of as like fun scary or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's fun. Is this really happening?
I saw you looking out the window of your background cabin.
Yep. I see a little claw appearing.
But would you not see the value in just what you were saying, Danderz? Would you not see the value in the thrill of it? Like, 'cause that's kind of what it is. It's thrilling.
That's the thing.
Like being scared.
And I want to make a quick caveat. It's like, I mean, because I was going to prepare the sort of analogy that like watching a scary movie, a genuinely scary movie, to me, it's like the equivalent of like eating a plate of shit. Do you know what I mean? It's like you sit down for a movie and like you decide to absolutely horrify yourself. It's like the equivalent of just shoveling feces in your mouth. It just doesn't make sense to me. But like then I get the thrill thing, I get the jump thing, and one thing I will say is that like I really love really chilling like let's say my favorite ever cinematic character is Heath Ledger's Joker. Do you know what I mean? And that's like haunting, and I love that. Do you know what I mean? But when it gets to like, for me, it's funny. When we were kids, people would say, "Oh, the supernatural stuff doesn't scare me as much as the real life stuff." Whereas I was the reverse, because like I have a vague belief in supernatural things. I just feel like we don't understand everything that's going on. And I have heard a lot of compelling evidence. And then, so I totally lost my train of thought. The ghosts again. But what was I saying? So the maybe you can just edit this bit out, Dino.
I think you're being possessed.
What'd you say?
I think you're being possessed.
I'm definitely being haunted.
You're usually much worse on podcasts.
I think I'd finish my point anyway.
I get it, D. And do you know what? Where I draw the line is those like horror movies. I'm doing air quotes right now because I don't really think they're horror movies where it's just either like gratuitous violence or just like gross shit where people are literally eating plates of shit. And it's like, why would I want to watch this? Yeah. That being said, back in our younger days, we didn't enjoy, but we did, out of morbid curiosity, partake in watching Two Girls, One Cup at some stage of our lives. have to say.
Yeah. And I don't know if this one will come up in the show, but Human Centipede was a pretty rough one to watch as well, man. And that's like in the same vein.
I think the first Human Centipede is actually fun spooky.
Yeah, for sure.
Whereas the second one gets, I don't even want to talk about it. It's real gross. And then the third one, it's kind
rad.
of the third one gets even more ridiculous, where it's a prison warden who goes crazy and thinks the best way to deal with the prisoners in his Texas prison are to attach 500 prisoners mouth to ass.
The best way to deal with these guys. But I love that you were so compelled by the first one that you watched 2 and 3 as well.
I didn't even watch 2 or 3. I was just curious, so I did the old let's
just
read
watch the
on
synopsis.
Wikipedia what happens. Yeah.
That's so funny.
But we're not here to watch the synopsis of horror movies, are we? Well, actually we might be. I don't know what Dave has in store for us today because he is our Podmaster of the Week. But just to give a little recap of how this show works, we are trying to come up with a hit podcast idea. We're trying to go number 1 on the charts, but we don't have that perfect pod idea quite yet. I don't think we've had some bangers, but nothing has really hit home. So we continue to pitch and pod until we find that golden idea. Is that fair to say?
Fair.
It's a good description.
Fair. Well, it's great with his words. Danderz
Concise.
And like I mentioned, Dave is our Podmaster of the Week, or should I say this week, our Scare Master of the Week. Woo!
You fucking love this shit, man.
And that is Davey Death Becomes Him Hogan. To remind everyone how this works, Davey Death Becomes Him Hogan will be pitching his terrifying new podcast idea and taking us through a complete trial episode. Following the podcast within a podcast, colloquially known as a podception on this show, and I'm sure around the world, we will collectively critique the show based on a classic podcast rating system. But the devil is very much in the details, so before he pitches, I am legally obligated to remind all the podgoblins out there that WSSAP never do any research as to whether these podcast ideas exist in the real world. So, by accessing the content of this podcast, including the information presented, opinions expressed, and creative elements, you are hereby forfeiting your rights to any intellectual property you may already hold in relation to your podcast. And there's nothing more scary than IP theft.
That one was like far more intense.
God, that one goes on.
What the fuck?
You're wondering what Scream TL meant. TL's too long.
Too long. Like, how many times can you use that in this episode? Like, I suppose there's going to be... It's a whole month of spookiness, I guess. So I'm sure you'll
Yes,
find
a whole month.
Yeah.
So, with that in mind, I will now let Davey introduce you to his latest depraved podcast idea. And what do you have for us today, Davey?
Yes, sir. Not so depraved. The title of the podcast today is Ghastly Flicks Podcast.
Ghastly
Any ideas?
Flicks, is it?
Ghastly Flicks Podcast. Any ideas what it could potentially be about?
I don't mean to be too basic, but like ghastly meaning spooky and flicks meaning movies would be my...
Well, basic has always been your default setting, Danderz. So, yeah.
It better be different to that note.
I wish I had like a sound effect that fit that, but I've limited myself to spooky sounds. It's kind of ruined the show.
That's fine. That's okay.
You threw away your and your ding.
Yeah, I threw away
in
it
favor
all.
of more spooky sounds.
But I think that Ghastly Flicks, the way like you did the inflection on it, Ghastly sounds like it could be like an Asian director named Ghastly, and it's his. We're going through his movie catalog.
Or French F1 driver Pierre Gasly.
Ooh.
Oh, what's really funny actually on that. So this is really dumb, but I actually don't watch F1. I just listen to an F1 podcast, so that's how I have all my knowledge about F1. I've never seen even like 10 seconds of a race, but I kept on hearing Joe Guan Yu, and like for like a year I thought he was like a French guy named like Joe Guan Yu, and then turns out he's Chinese.
Yeah, they struggle with the old pronunciation, but yeah, that's interesting that you listen but don't watch at all. Like, I think it's very engaging. You should try 10 seconds of a race. It's especially like when you see someone, overtake when it's like a spooky moment, it's very scary.
And my boy is on top now. my boy, is winning races. Oscar Piastri,
Yeah, no, he's
former
a,
Disastry.
he's a winner. Like he's a fast guy. Like he's got something special, but he's also like unapologetically I was gonna say self-interested. Of course they all are, like they're all out to win, but it's just very like he'd sell his grandmother for a shot at the title. Like, you know, he is. Did you catch the whole thing with Renault? Like he was like bought up by Alpine, like they nurtured him through their racing program, and then they like had him as a backup driver, and then they lost their main driver and they needed to so they're like, okay, he's our main driver for the next race. And he released this like Instagram, I don't know what, like post being like, I am not joining Alpine. How dare they say that? I am now joining McLaren. Bye bye Alpine. Fuck you. Like it was so awkward. Like the whole world was like, okay, you know.
And speaking of like Oscar Piastri on Instagram, I think this was him. I'm almost certain it was him. A few weeks ago, he like posted a picture from like, I think
his
he was in the cockpit. You know, he's not Christian Horner. So he posted a picture of himself in like a cockpit and made some like reference to being in a cockpit, and it's like just the typical rich person shit. And then he very quickly deleted it because he must have realized that he posted it on 9/11.
Bless that man. Anyway, we'll save it for F1 month, spooky F1 month.
Sorry, one more Oscar Piastri thing. There was some well-known person on Twitter who watched their first F1 race. This is a while ago. Can't remember who she was. Anyways, she like posts this big thing on Twitter about how it's ridiculous that this guy can just get away with murdering his wife, and now he's like a famous F1 driver. And she got Oscar Piastri mixed up with Pretorius.
That's brilliant, man.
Anyways, we are not.
Can
here to
I
talk
like?
about
But before
F1.
we jump in, like, why would you be that vacant and then be that open with it? Like, surely you'd question yourself if you weren't that like confident about something that's so, you know, like. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, do some research
before you like make a public appeal about it. That's crazy. Anyway, sorry about that. It wasn't worth it.
And I'm sure Dave did a lot of research into his latest podcast, which is called Ghastly Flicks Podcast, I believe. And I believe me and Danderz were both very off the mark on what we thought your podcast might be.
Well, no, to be fair, Danderz was correct. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
That sounds good. So I guess without further ado, we are ready to dive into this week's podcast, Podception. And that podcast is, of course, the Ghastly Flicks Podcast.
Welcome, spooky movie buffs, to the Ghastly Flicks Podcast, your one-stop pod for cinematic experiences of the spooky variety. This episode is, of course, special as we are officially in the spooky season. So grab your popcorn and overpriced seasonal treats because we got an episode lined up for you. First, I want to welcome our panel members, Jump Scared, Spooky, and of course, I am your host, Davey Horror Hogan. For our newer listeners, let me briefly run you through the structure of the show. We will start off how we always do, paying homage to our Fleek of the Week in the Dracula accent. It sounded better in my head. Hoping that this section really reminds you of a great movie you've once seen, or even better, inspires you to give it a watch. Our second section will be our panel members bringing forward a favorite scene of theirs from a classic horror movie, discussing items such as acting, music, significance, etc. What made them tick from the scene. Our last section will be a fun game of which will be revealed when we fold upon it. How are we feeling today, boys? Feeling spooky?
I'm feeling spooky. I'm feeling quite spooked in the fact that, so obviously we plan a podcast, and Dave knew what my spooky podcast name was and used it as one of his segments. And I think the premise is pretty similar to what my podcast idea is. Thank you for that, Dave.
Well, if you were listening correctly, it wasn't Freak of the Week. It was Fleek of the Week, which is Flick of the Week in a Dracula accent. So not exactly the same. Nor is the segment anything to do with your segment that you had mentioned. So don't you worry about that.
Also, Dave's recording first, so he gets the rights. So bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks for hanging me out to dry as well. I appreciate that. No, I wouldn't do that to you.
This got me like...
I would never do that to you. Never do that either. Anyway, as mentioned, our first section will be paying homage to a classic horror movie, a personal favorite of my own. This week's movie is Halloween.
Oh, nice. Love it.
Have you guys seen this movie?
I have, of course. I don't know if I've seen all the sequels, but I've seen the original. Not in a long time.
I'll be honest, I don't know if I've seen all of them either. I've seen the first 2 or 3, I'd say. But there was a few. I don't how many was there? Was there 6 or 7, something like that?
Yeah, at least 5 or 6. And then we got like new releases of ones as well, which were like, honestly, some of them were pretty good.
Yeah. How about you, Danderz? Have you seen it?
Not me. No, my co-panelists will know that I'm not a scary, spooky movie fan, despite my name being spooky, which I think was kind of put on blast. My name is actually Danderz for the pod, Dave, but it's the same guy.
It's a made-up name, Danderz. Just get with it.
I'll beep it out. I'll do something with it.
Just beep it out.
Don't be silly. No, I'm very happy for everyone to recognize how spooky I am. No, so I do avoid the scary movies. I just I likened it in our pre-recording to eating a big plate of shit.
And the person who said that is
I don't I feel like to sit down to watch a movie. Now, I like complicated movies that make you think, challenging movies that make you question things. But when it comes to like actually scaring yourself versus like a jump, when you're like sitting up at night, like sweating, can't get to sleep or whatever, I'm just thinking like, where's the value in that? So that's where I stand. Now, I pick up the references, and Halloween's obviously a big one, as in the movie. I know they did like a reboot like a few years ago. But no, I know because I watched the 3-minute synopsis that Dave sent us about what it's about. But no, I've not seen it. But I understand its cultural significance, and fair play to Michael Myers. Fair play to him.
The slasher in it?
Yeah, he's broken the mold.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Achieved his goals.
Danderz misunderstood and watched all the Austin Powers movies.
Mike Myers.
He came to the recording dressed as Austin Powers. Groovy baby.
Well, as mentioned, this section is paying pure homage to said movie. So if you will, guys, I have a brief review of Halloween. If you'd allow me to go through it. Halloween is a masterclass in suspense and atmosphere that has solidified its place as a cornerstone of the horror genre. Directed by John Carpenter, the film expertly combines chilling visuals with an unforgettable theme tune that perfectly encapsulates the essence of fear. From the very first scene, the tension is palpable. The haunting story of Michael Myers and his relentless pursuit of Laurie Strode is not just about the scares, it's about the psychological impact of terror. Jamie Lee Curtis delivers a stellar performance as Laurie, embodying the resilience and vulnerability that makes her character so relatable. So like, what's interesting about Jamie Lee Curtis and this movie specifically was like, she didn't really do much before this. This was her first big movie. Like she had plenty of movies afterwards, such as like The Fog, Trading Places, Freaky Friday, but this was the first major movie she had, and for that to be true, and also how iconic that actual role was in the horror genre altogether, is actually it's pretty huge, really, for your first major movie to make that kind of impact on the genre of which you're acting in. Like, she was the original. So have you guys heard of the final girl trope?
Well, I used it in the intro, Dave, and I just need to stop you there. I just have a question for Danderz. I know you're not a big fan of horror movies. Do you consider Freaky Friday a horror movie?
It is a little freaky.
Is that your limit of how far you'll go?
That's like right on the cusp of fun spooky, as we were talking about earlier. It does keep me up a little bit at night, but it's worth the thrill. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like, but does she still menstruate?
But yeah, where was I? But yeah, she was the original final girl. It kind of fed into that final girl trope that we see so commonly throughout the genre of horror.
I don't know, is Alien a horror movie? But Sigourney Weaver very young in that as well, and like unestablished. I feel, maybe someone will correct me on that, but like maybe she kind of set the mold. Jamie Lee, Jay Lee. I don't know which was first actually. Which movie was first?
This was 1978, so
yeah, I'm sure Alien was 80s. So
yeah,
sounds about right. Well done, Jay Lee C.
And like, is horror the genre that really was the first to have very strong female leading characters?
It's an interesting question.
Probably not, I'd imagine.
I think that was the what was oh damn, I can't even remember the name of the female empowerment movement from the early 20th century. Female liberation movement or something. Flip it, man.
Yeah, but in like the mainstream,
Banter ruined. Yeah, no,
in mainstream like movies was the horror genre the first to really push that.
Maybe
We had some awesome female leads, like you said, like Sigourney Weaver in Alien, so sick.
It's a question to ask for spook season. I think let's get some answers for our listeners, right?
Let's get some answers.
I can think of some leading female characters in like early 20th century movies, but to be fair, they're always leading female characters under a leading male character, kind of. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah.
I think you might be onto something. And I know that horror is kind of it's like a historical genre. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's quite old. It's got roots in like 18th century writings and stuff like that. You know what I mean? It feels older than a lot of modern genres, like the kind of Disney thing, which really kind of grew out of horror. You know what I mean? Anyway.
You had Jane Fonda in Cat Ballou, Barbara Stanwyck in 40 Guns. These are movies I've never even heard, but these were like the 50s, 60s.
Yeah.
There's a mention of a Joan of Arc movie.
Yeah, the original leading lady. Can I tell you about Joan of Arc? She died at the age of 19, having done all of that crap. Isn't that mad? Like burned at the stake at 19.
Jesus.
You know, nuts, man.
That's crazy.
Anyway.
We're fucking failures. We're in our 30s starting a dumb fucking podcast.
But not getting burned at the stake.
Yeah.
Let's keep it moving. Let's keep it moving. Carpenter's direction is both innovative and impactful, using long, steady shots to create an unsettling sense of anticipation. The film's ability to evoke fear without relying heavily on gore is a testament to its craftsmanship. The movie thrives on atmosphere and the unseen horrors lurking just out of sight. And what's interesting about that particular point is that I find Halloween to be one of the more timeless horror movies. There are a lot of older horror movies that lean on gore and lean on guts and blood and shit, but we as a society are becoming so desensitized to that. Like my Twitter feed is like fight, some guy getting his arm cut off, fight, car crash. You know, we're just so desensitized as a society that it's tough for like older movies to really like stay timeless when they're leaning on that kind of element, that like element of blood, guts and gore. You know, whereas Halloween doesn't need to do that. So I think that's what helps it remain timeless. What are you laughing at?
I just like, why is your algorithm so violent? It's refreshing to not see so many blood and guts. I'm like, I don't go around seeing blood and guts on the daily. Like, anyway.
To be fair, I'm pretty new to Twitter X, and when I logged on, it just showed me fights and stuff, and I'm just watching that shit. So I guess it thinks I like it. I don't know.
It thinks you like it.
And I know you're saying that now people are exposed to that more than ever, but I don't think so. I think we grew up in this like burgeoning age of the internet where it was fucking lawless, and we had things like
Two Girls, One Cup,
and we were like watching literal videos of terrorists beheading people with bread knives. It was horrific, and we saw it all. And I tell people who are younger now that stuff was readily like
available,
not even just available on the internet, but it would come to you without you even wanting it.
Yeah,
they're like, what the fuck?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I would always avoid watching it, but kids at school would come up and like show it, having downloaded it on their phone. And I mean, it was so much harder to download on your phone back in the day that, you know, it isn't like you kind of flick a button and just, you know, say, oh, well, why not? Like it was like planned, do you know what I mean? So then they'd come around showing everyone in the school the beheading video. It's just disgusting.
There was no censorship on our phones back then, unfortunately. So yeah, moving on, the legacy of Halloween is undeniable. It's not only set the standard for the slasher films, but also influenced countless filmmakers and franchises that followed. Its themes of innocence versus evil, along with the iconic imagery of Michael Myers, have become ingrained in pop culture. That's actually a fun fact about Mike Myers, the imagery of it that I'll tell you in a minute afterwards. Overall, Halloween is a timeless classic that continues to resonate with audience. It's a perfect blend of storytelling, suspense, and memorable characters that keeps viewers on the edge of their seats, making it a must-watch for horror enthusiasts and newcomers alike. So what's like funny about Halloween is when I think of horrors, and this is just a personal note for myself, when I think of horrors, the first thing I think of is something like a slasher, like something like that. The whole idea of, say, a house being haunted by a fucking family that lived there 200 years ago never really gripped me. But the idea of some fucker in overalls with a big knife running through my small America town where you can scream but no one's going to hear you because there's fucking nobody around, I think that really resonated with me.
Dave's getting excited, man. Big fucking knife running through the village. No one can hear me.
But also what's, and this is probably going to be the same for you guys, because you guys, similar to me, grew up in like ruralish areas, like maybe not so rural as me. Like when I walk outside, if there's where I grew up, if I walk outside, if there's a serial killer out there, I better start running, because if I scream, no one's going to hear me. Like that, isn't people for fucking kilometers. So I think when I finish watching Halloween in my house at home in Ireland and the movie finishes and the lights go off and we go to bed, it's a lot more scary than my 14th floor apartment here in Vancouver where nobody can get to me after watching.
You want to be scared, and that's the main thing, right? You want to go to sleep and feel chills and not know if someone's going to creep up behind you and sneak up under your bed and murder you in your sleep.
I don't think it's that Danderz. It's like you don't leave the movie thinking you're immediately going to get murdered.
That would be too obvious.
I don't know. It's just the mystery around it all. Like, ooh, this could happen maybe somewhere, probably not to me, but you know,
is someone gonna sew my mouth to someone else's ass?
I hope
so. Some interesting facts about Halloween. Any guesses as to what the budget was for this movie? Now, just for few nuggets of info to help you out with this. So it was made in 1978. Just for reference, around 80s movies in specifically, E.T. had a budget of 10.5 million. Star Wars Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back, was 33 million. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade had a budget of 48 million. And of course, that was in the 80s. So 2020s, 40 years later, Spider-Man No Way Home, 200 million. Inside Out 2, 200 million. So there's a variance, obviously, in budgets between now and the 80s, but any guesses?
5 million.
5 mil?
John Carpenter is a pretty well-known, like, he's a really famous director. I don't know if this was near the beginning of his career, but
for the fact Dave is pitching it as a surprising moment, I'm going to say it was super low budget. I'm going 500,000.
500,000? Close. Danderz was closest. It was 300,000 was the budget for Halloween, and it grossed over 70 million at the box office,
wow.
which makes it one of the most profitable independent films of all time. On that point, the most profitable independent film of all time was also a horror movie. Any guesses which one it was?
Halloween 2?
They got nothing for that movie.
Jaws was pretty highly grossing.
Yeah. Well, you got to think budget compared to gross. So profitable.
Well, Jaws' budget was pretty low as well.
They just needed to find an enormous shark who was willing to pose for shots.
Anyway, I'll give it to you. It was The Nightmare on Elm Street. Of course, the budget for that was about 60,000, and they grossed over 200 million.
Freddy Krueger, more like Freddy Frugal.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Not Nightmare on Elm Street. Apologies. Sorry.
My great joke.
Your joke reminded me that I was actually wrong. It was the Blair Witch Project, the one that was essentially filmed.
I mean, that's it's based on a low budget idea, which is cool. But just to shout out Nightmare on Elm Street for a second, like, you know, I'm not a fan of the horror genre, but there's nothing scarier than being like, don't fall asleep because that's where we're going to kill you in your dreams. Do you know what I mean? Like, fair play to them. That's a fucking scary idea. Do you know what I mean? That's a premise that, like, you know, that's an iconic horror premise. Anyway, move on.
And I think The Simpsons further immortalized that with the Treehouse of Horrors episode with Groundkeeper Willie as the Freddy Krueger
I don't remember it. No.
I need to watch that again. Shit.
Well, never mind then. Fuck it.
So low budget, high grossing, pretty impressive. The iconic theme music is another interesting fact. So John Carpenter composed the film's haunting music in just a few days. The simple yet eerie theme has since become one of the most recognizable pieces of music in horror cinema. One of the most recognizable pieces of music ever, to be honest, in film in general. From a quick Google, I could spot that it's been sampled in over 80 songs. One of which that I know quite well was Murder Inc. by Dr. Dre. It was on the 2001 album. Another one would be I'm With Whatever by Biggie, Psycho Bitch by Tech Nine, The Tower by Ice-T. That's just a few. It seems to be common enough in rap songs, to be fair.
I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah.
He was one of the original kings of rocking a synthesizer, John Carpenter.
Oh, was he? That's interesting.
Yeah. That song, it's Chariot of Pumpkins. Is that what it's called?
Is that the name of it?
I think so.
Ooh.
I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Interesting. I'll write that down and check that out. So I mentioned that there was an interesting point as well about Michael Myers' iconic kind of presence. So in the credits, he's often referred to as the Shape. So instead of Michael Myers, instead of being credited as like a character with character development and like fucking lines in the movie, he's called the Shape, which kind of emphasizes the role as an almost supernatural force of evil rather than an actual character in the movie. Yeah, I thought that was quite clever, a clever way of, an artistic way of kind of portraying him as such, and like an Easter egg almost.
Can I leverage your guys' insider knowledge? Like, I watched the 3-minute synopsis, Dave. I saw him as a child, like, I saw his face, having murdered his sister or whatever. Do you see his face for the rest of the film? And do you see any, like, dialogue or whatever from him? Do you know what I mean?
That's funny that you said that. That was my point, that I had completely forgotten that near the end of the movie, during like the last fight scene, the mask comes off for a second and you see his actual face, which I think was actually a poor decision. In subsequent movies, I don't think you ever see his face, and it makes him more of like this entity rather than something that is of flesh and blood that can be killed. Yeah,
exactly. Because I mean, there's fucking, he stretched it out for like 5 or 6 movies. He obviously can't be fucking killed.
Yeah, and why is that?
Right.
Like, I mean,
I did think that was
why does he become like supernatural? As in,
it's a fucking metaphor.
No, but I mean that's my point is that, like, you know, speaking to him being an entity or whatever, you know, he's clearly a child at the start of the film who grows up to be an adult, and then all of a sudden he's reanimating everywhere. But then you see his face at the end of the movie and he's just a human. Like, I mean, so there's something missing there. Like, and it's not even like he died in the first place and then came back from the dead. It's like he was never dead. He was sent to like a mental asylum kind of thing, and then he comes out and all of a sudden he can like reanimate, you know, from being shot 6 times or being stabbed or whatever. Whereas, do you know what you know what I'm saying, right? Like,
one of the later movies, I believe, is called Season of the Witch. Now, I'm not up to speed on my Halloween movies, as it were, so I don't know any of the details. So if you're a Halloween buff out there, don't come at me. But I think it kind of explains some of this supernatural shit later on. But then also, big fans of the Halloween franchise actually don't count some of the movies as canon.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Season of the Witch actually might be one of the ones that they're like, trash it. Like, this isn't part of the storyline.
I'll bet that makes sense. But they've made an effort to kind of retroactively making sense of the supernatural elements. But then they're like, well, you're not canon because you came afterwards and you're not official. Yeah.
That's interesting. The final fun fact I have about Halloween, and this is actually a very fun fact: the iconic mask worn by Michael Myers was actually a modified Captain Kirk mask from Star Trek. The filmmakers painted it white, altered the eye holes, and to create like a more menacing look. If you look at them side by side, they are obviously the same fucking mask. So I thought that was quite interesting.
That is really interesting.
Yeah,
I think the mask also kind of looked like, if you ever look at some golden retrievers, they kind of look like Michael Myers.
It's got a bit of a dog look to it, doesn't it?
I know what you mean. Yeah.
In a weird way. It's got a bit of a dog look to it. Oh, I can't show you the photo. I was going to screenshot and send it to you. Anyway, doesn't matter. So that is the end of section 1. As I mentioned, we wanted to just pay homage to such an iconic movie. So thank you, John Carpenter, for a great movie and cinematic experience. And a timeless classic.
and we will get to segment 2 right after this short but very scary break.
Moving swiftly onwards. Oh, damn. It's fucking delayed. I saw the cursor as well, and I was like, is it coming? Am I just sitting here in silence? Anyway, moving swiftly onwards to section 2 of this podcast, Dino. In this part of the show, each member of the panel will bring forth a scene from a famous horror movie that they particularly enjoyed for discussion. Pretty self-explanatory. How do you guys get on this week coming up with your scene? You happy with your choices?
I had a few different movies I wanted to pull from, but I think in the end, my one is very true to me.
I'm happy with my choice as well. I had to do a little sort of research into movies that I'd actually seen, and I was like, will I name a scene from a horror film that I've never watched before? And I didn't.
When Jamie Lee Curtis and Lindsay Lohan run at each other.
And so iconic. So yeah, definitely excited for my one. But do you know what? There's a couple of major films that I saw like half of that I could have referenced if I remembered any of. Do you remember 2006 was a big 6 of the 6th thing? You know, it was the first time that was going to happen in 1,000 years. And they released The Omen, like a reboot of The Omen on that day. And I was very young, and I went to see that. Like, it's obviously an 18s movie. We got into the movie theater. And like I said to you guys earlier, the supernatural stuff is the stuff that spooks me, because you just never know. Whereas you can count to the likelihood of a slasher being in your, country village or whatever. And again, the ghost has stolen my spooky thoughts, man. I don't know what it is. But yeah, I walked out of the cinema halfway through. I was like, "Fuck this." So yeah, move on.
Well, I am looking forward to hearing both of your scenes, but first, I suppose I'll kick off proceedings here. The scene of which I would like to discuss or bring forth is it's in Saw, the original Saw. Have you guys seen it?
I have. I think I saw it.
I've seen so much about Saw that I can't actually remember if I've even seen the whole first film. Like, it feels like I have. I've seen so much around it, if that makes sense. But I'm not even certain that I have.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, even if you haven't seen it, you'll probably have seen this scene or heard this scene being used in pop culture. It's probably one of the most iconic scenes from the series. It is a scene where Adam and Lawrence must decide whether to chop off a leg. They're in that eerie bathroom. I suppose I'll just break down the scene for you. So the scene takes place in a grimy, dimly lit bathroom where Adam and Dr. Lawrence Gordon wake up chained to pipes on opposite sides of the room. They're both disorientated and confused about how they got there. They discover a tape recorder left by Jigsaw. Jigsaw is the antagonist in the movie. He's the scary fucker that wears a mask and things like that, which explains the rules of the game. They learn that they must make a gruesome choice to escape. One must sacrifice a limb. As the clock ticks down, the desperation escalates. Lawrence, who is revealed to be a doctor, begins to understand the severity of their situation. While Adam's panic grows, they both realize time is running out. Dr. Gordon ultimately decides that amputation is their only option. He takes a razor saw, and the film captures.
Spoiler alert.
The film captures his emotional turmoil, fear, anger, despair. It's a pretty fucking gruesome scene. It's a pretty intense scene. Like, they're both screaming. He's obviously chopping his leg off. You can, when it's happening, you can feel the saw on your leg, which is fucking nuts. Did you not get that? Did you not feel that? Do you know, like when you see someone get kicked in the balls, you kind of clench your arse cheeks? It's kind of a similar kind of thing.
For me, it's broken bones. If anyone breaks a bone in a movie, that, like, I feel that.
Oh, for me, it's pulling nails or sticking stuff under nails. That is the worst thing for me. It literally gives me the willies.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Danderz nails is fucking weird. Yeah. Anyway, the scene is graphic, showcasing the physical and psychological horror of the choice. The sound design amplifies the horror, with the visceral effects contributing to the shock factor. After the act, they realize the futility of their choice as the situation becomes more dire. The stakes are raised even further, leading to a shocking twist that reveals the true nature of the game, yada, yada, yada. You'd have to watch the movie to figure out how it all unfolds. But that scene in itself, it's so... First of all, the fucking series is called Saw. They're left with a saw. He has to chop his leg off. As I said, it's one of the seeds that are used in pop culture quite frequently. I'm pretty sure that particular scene was like how would you say, redone in one of the Scary movies, maybe 3,
Sure, yeah.
4. Can't remember which one.
Been appropriated in a number of places, I'd say. It's like you say, it's an iconic scene. I mean, it's the first Saw scene, you know. I saw the Saw and I seen the scene, you know.
It definitely isn't the first movie to do this, but it's definitely, for me, the first movie that introduced me to the genre of torture porn, essentially. Do you know what I mean? That's what they call it, right? Those movies where it's just like torture porn. It's like, it's gratuitous violence.
Yeah, it's a pretty shocking scene. The shock value is pretty intense. The scene is crucial, not only for its shock value, but also for its exploration of the moral dilemmas and the human instincts for survival. It encapsulates the film's themes of sacrifice, desperation, and the psychological games played by Jigsaw. The graphic nature of the scene also helped establish Saw as a benchmark in the horror genre, especially in the realm of psychological and torture horror. It really fucking carved its position in the
Danderz is standing up out of the frame, holding his mic. I think he's about to pass out for us talking about Saw.
For the listeners that aren't aware that I've developed some lower back problems the last couple of days, so I'm trying to silently manage them while also keeping good banter and not ruining Dave's flow, not being super successful.
Danderz, you must stand for the remainder of the podcast.
Your friends must not know why. Sorry, David.
It's all good. Yeah, pretty crazy scene. But yeah, definitely. I feel like the series kind of just went downhill from the first one.
It's usually the case. I have no time for like multiple sequel sagas. It like makes me scoff and roll my eyes. Like when you get to Fast and Furious 10 or 11 or whatever.
Yeah.
Geez.
I mean, whatever about action movies, I suppose you can keep working off a blueprint for them. But like for horror movies, I feel like it's tough to actually effectively have multiple movies in a sequel and still keep rehashing the same thing while also keeping it fresh. Like, I mean, Saw, as I said, kind of dissolved over time. I feel like when Paranormal Activity first came out, it was huge, but then the second one was like, not quite as good the second time. And there's probably other examples in the horror movie genre that
The Conjuring.
How many of them was there?
There's like at least 3 of them.
Jesus.
Like the first one was good, and then
It's just a cash cow. You know, they just resurrect those things. I mean, regardless of the sort of what do you call it? I don't know. Just the quality or the integrity of the saga. You know what I mean? They're like dollar signs.
In saying that, I've watched all of the Saw movies. I just think they're entertaining.
Well, it's
I
the
just
same
think
as
they're
Fast and Furious 10. My issue with that is that the first movie, like you say, I mean, it's actually funny if you Google the ratings that the first one's like one of the worst rated films out of all of them. And like it's the realist, as in it's like the most potentially realistic and sort of gritty or whatever you want to call it. And I love the first Fast and Furious film. I really, really do. But then it just like they changed the blueprint over time to a heist action film, which it wasn't originally really. Do you know what I mean? But I guess there wasn't much of a market for the first one or whatever.
Fun fact though, Too Fast, Too Furious is and has been one of my favorite movies of all time.
I enjoy the second one quite a bit as well.
Really enjoyed it. Not the only sequel that is one of my favorite movies of all time. Bad Boys 2 is clearly better than Bad Boys
Shrek
1.
2?
Shrek 2 also quite good.
In the horror genre, I like Aliens better than Alien.
Oh, interesting.
There is a couple of them. Oh, I can't remember the others, but I had a couple of those like in my head that the sequel is better than the first. It isn't a common thing. It does happen like once in a blue moon.
Once in a blue moon is right. But yeah, that was it. The scene from Saw where he's chopping off the leg was pretty impactful scene. Just when I thought of the segment, it was the first one that came into my head to kind of work through with you guys.
Yeah, big scene in pop culture, like you say, Dave. You know, very impactful,
Huge.
Very influential scene. That's for sure. I mean, like, how many times has Saw been appropriated really based off that scene? Like, I did. I don't know if you. I mean, you guys will remember. Our listeners probably won't. When we were all in college together, university for the British listeners, there are these things that would go around that were like the equivalent of viral trends, where we did what we call neck nominations, which is where we would like find a creative way to down a pint or something. And I remember Dino over here downing pint after pint around Cork City, getting quite merry with the boys, but I appropriated Saw for my nomination, which was quite cringy looking back on it. I'd done this whole fake blood thing, and I found a voice app that you could convert your voice into jigsaws and everything. And I haven't even seen the film, and I did a whole thing. Do you know what I mean? So.
I've tried to find it in later years.
Oh my God.
I'm pretty sure you've scrubbed it from the internet.
I don't remember scrubbing it. I don't know. Maybe Facebook just decided to shield that from the world. I'm still waiting for that for you to drink that pint, Kate McNamara.
Thanks for that, Danderz. So, anyway, what scene have you got for me?
I'm going to keep mine short and sweet. A Stephen King classic. One of the original horror movies that I saw and scared the absolute shit out of me. I like the reboots of it, but the reboots to me are more like fun, spooky, and the original was like literally just fucking terrifying, and that is Stephen King's It.
Classic.
And the scene is like one of the opening scenes, I believe, and it's so one of the main characters' younger brother gets killed by Pennywise. Spoiler alert: Pennywise is the clown. And his name's Georgie. It's raining outside. He's chasing a little paper boat down the street, like it's flowing through the kind of gutters. There's like kind of nice music playing, and then it gets a bit spooky, and his little boat goes down the drain, and who comes up with it but Pennywise. And this original Pennywise was way scarier than the new one. The makeup was just terrifying. The new Pennywise, he's meant to feel like this unsettling, like alien who doesn't quite get human behavior, and that's where the unsettling nature comes from. But the original Pennywise just felt like a legit child predator, which made it like even more scary. And that's Tim Curry played him, and he did a great job, and he has this great voice, and he's like,
Hey, Georgie. Oh, don't you wanna Baloo?
it's fucking great.
Dino used to do that scene in school like all the time, without
It's one
any
of my favorite
punchline.
scenes.
Like you would just go up to the girls and do that without any kind of context whatsoever.
My dad told me not to talk to strangers. A very wise man your dad was. Very wise man indeed.
Yeah.
Tell me, how does he come up from the drain? Is it like what kind of?
His head just like poking in like the little out of the drain. He's down there and you can see him,
Right.
and he's holding the boat.
But does like he doesn't come out of the drain? As in, like, is it big enough?
No, you only see
just
like
his...
you only see like the top of his head.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the end of the scene, he pulls Georgie down into the drain because he's like, I got balloons down here or something. And Georgie's like, do they float? And he goes, oh, yes.
Oh God.
They float, Georgie. And when you're down here, you float too.
And he pulls Georgie down into the drain. Oh, it's so good.
It's terrifying. I've seen the new one. I haven't seen the original one. Is it pretty much the same story entirely in the old one?
Same
as
story.
Like he's a shape-shifting kind of thing.
Yeah, it's the same story. In the end, it turns out he's some like weird alien thing that shapeshifts into your worst fear. But I think the original one was just so much more like eerie and off-putting and unsettling. And there was a scene where he comes out of a drain at one stage in a shower, and I would not go poo at night for a year because I thought he would come out of the toilet and get me.
That sounds
Right through my butt.
exciting. That's what you like, right? To be kept awake at night and loving life by the thrills. Actually, if I may drop a little story in the middle of this, I remember when myself and Dino were about 14 at a birthday party, and we both avoided watching the horror film. Now I feel like Dino compensated for that by making it part of his personality after that point in time. But there was a horror film that was on, and neither of us watched it. And we were kind of cursing ourselves for avoiding being part of the cool group watching the film. And then we were like, nah, we do what we want. We're the cool guys here. And case in
Was
point,
that when people were watching Antichrist?
I don't know. It was Rory. Not Rory. What was his name? Ronan Corcoran's birthday party at his big house.
Different movie.
Do you remember?
Yeah, different movie then.
Yeah, I don't know what the movie was, but anyway.
What do you got, Danderz? In the interest of time, we'll move it along.
Yeah. So like I said earlier, I picked one that I've actually seen, which is the film is American Psycho.
Oh,
Yeah.
such a good movie.
Pause for
So
reaction.
classic.
Yeah. So my scene from that, and again, like I had to kind of research to get back up to speed, but my best scene from that is one of the opening scenes when he is doing his skincare routine, and it's like setting the tone for the whole movie. And he's going through all of these kind of shallow, procedures, whatever that he does, his routine. And he puts this face mask on and then peels it off. And so he's like peeling it looks like he's peeling the skin of his own face off. I mean, people will know what a kind of a beauty mask is or whatever. And in the background, he's like quietly talking about how you can look at him and you can shake his hand, but he's not there. Like he's just this entity. There's nothing behind the facade. And like while he's peeling his skin off, it's obviously like the whole concept of the film is that society is really shallow. There's nothing deeper. There's nothing underneath the skin. And so you keep seeing his face distorted in all of these images, like before he does something. And then at the end of the film, spoiler alert, you never know like whether this is all beneath the surface or whether it's actually happening, basically, if you know what I mean. Like he isn't sure whether he's actually committing these crazy things at the end or whether but like that's just going on under the surface, but it's not actually happening. And also it just reminds you of a snake, shedding his skin and just setting the tone for how kind of creepy and evil he is. And I thought it was a bit of a masterpiece in terms of setting the scene for the whole film, giving you the idea about the context of what it's like setting up, and the acting is just phenomenal. Like Christian Bale is a Brit, people forget, and he does almost, and if you actually hear his accent, it's very British, but he does almost every film as an American. Like I don't know about flawlessly, but like to I don't think a lot of people realize that, and he is cool as ice in that scene, and he is just like staring, peeling this face perfectly off, and I just thought it was chilling, and it definitely set the tone for the film. So that's my pick. A classic moment.
I love it. I thought you were going to choose when he murders Paul Allen. And he's like, do you enjoy Huey Lewis news? And
or actually, I was originally going to do the chainsaw scene. But like, I was like, how much can I speak to this? It's obviously an iconic scene. But, when he drops it down the stairs. But I thought that this one was much more impactful for me because of, like I say, the what it does to set up the context and everything else. You know what I mean? It's haunting.
Did you read the book?
No. But I would like to. Yeah, I would like to.
Thanks, Danderz. Much appreciated.
There's some. I'm trying to remember. There's some like not funny, but interesting story about Christian Bale being cast and like the director wanted to make it for years. Do you know that story?
I looked it up, because I looked it up yesterday. There was I can't remember the director's name, but he got pulled off it for some reason, and he wanted Christian Bale, and then the other guy that came on wanted Leo. And I don't know how, but eventually there was creative differences, and him, he left with Leo, and so finally then the guy got to make it with Bale, and it was like you say, a years in the making thing. It was a moment.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. I haven't seen that movie in years. I watched it when I was young. Must give it another watch.
It is a good one.
Indeed. So, with that being said, that marks the end of this week's podcast. Our spookiest episode of Ghastly Flicks. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you to our co-hosts, Dino and Danderz. Tune in next week as we deep dive yet again into some more cinematic horror. Enjoy the rest of your week, and don't forget, leave the lights on.
Welcome back to We Should Start a Podcast. We just heard our possibly spookiest podcast idea ever from, what was your name, Dave, your spooky name?
Davey Horror Hogan. There wasn't a lot of thought put into those. It was dumb,
that was good.
Dumb, silly alliteration. I could have done a lot better.
This is like, I don't know, like Freddy Krueger trying to justify his name. I mean, there wasn't a lot of thought put into it. I mean, if you don't like it, I can change it.
It's Krueger like Ruger.
And I believe that was called the Ghastly Flicks Podcast. Is that correct?
That's it, kid. That's it.
And as always, we will critique the Ghastly Flicks podcast using the classic podcast rating system based on 3 criteria, which are, of course, number 1, the concept or general idea of the show. Number 2, longevity. Do we think this show has legs to grow? And number 3, pod sauce. This is the je ne sais quoi, flair, or spice to the podcast that makes it a winner. Pod sauce could be literally anything you enjoyed from the pod or something you thought gave it some extra flavor. This week, pod sauce segment is sponsored by garlic aioli. Okay? Which is a subtle way of saying we don't want any vampires listening to our show. We hate vampires, don't we, boys? We hate them.
Yeah, if you're a vampire, get out.
Yeah,
We don't want you
vampires
here.
are ruining our country.
Werewolves all the way.
I hate
No
immigration
vampires allowed
of
in our show.
vampires.
So after discussing these 3 criteria, we will each give our final rating of this week's podcast. Will it be a smash hit or should we trash it? So Dave, why don't you take us through the rating system? And once again, I must reiterate, if you're a vampire and you're listening to this show, fuck off.
Leave. Stop listening and walk away.
Take a good hard look at yourself in the mirror. Oh wait, you
You
can't.
can't. Yeah. Get back into your coffin and don't sleep for another 1,000 years. Get out of here.
We're going to be cancelled.
Blatant anti-vampire.
So I will say before we get into this, with regards to concept, I really enjoyed doing this, writing up this podcast, doing some background research, as I mentioned to you earlier, Dino, into horror movies, something that you want to really look at maybe once or twice a year during the spooky season. It's always fun to take a deep dive and learn like some interesting facts and stuff about these movies you'd have seen but might not know certain things about. So anyway, concept, the general idea of the show. How are we feeling about that?
I love the concept actually, which is funny because I'm obviously the anti-horror fan here, but no, like obviously there's a lot of fun to be had there for sure. And we even had to scrap one of Dave's segments just to because we were having too much fun chatting and shooting the shit. So yeah, big 5 stars for me for the concept for sure.
Thank you, and thank you for stepping out of your comfort zone to work with me on the pod. As we've mentioned a few times, horror movies and horror scares are not exactly your forte. So thank you, Danderz.
I was gonna say I love to be uncomfortable, David, but that kind of goes against what I was just saying there. No, it's actually not. Like I don't. It's not about being uncomfortable necessarily, because like I said, I like challenging things. But yeah, no, I appreciate that anyway. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Dino, how are we feeling on concept?
I loved the concept. I love horror movies. I love that I can only see the very top of Dander's head in the screen.
It goes from standing up to just seeing like an inch of his forehead in the camera.
It was very mysterious and I loved it. But no, back to the show. I did really like the concept. You know me. I'm all about it. I'm all about the scares. I'm all about the horror of it all.
You're a spooky fan.
And yeah.
Spooky fan.
That's it.
Thanks, guys. The longevity of the show. How are we feeling about that, Dino?
You know, people have been getting frights since the beginning of time and they will continue to get frights into the future. I think there's limitless potential. We have so much horror content over the last however many years, and I'm here to talk about it. I would love to continue this podcast into the future and talk about more horror movies. I think Dander's patience might run out a little bit.
There's
But for
only
me,
so much background research.
I'm in 100%.
Well, there is a long month of October there, so we've plenty spooky conversations to have. Danderz, how are you feeling about longevity?
Yeah, definitely there must be some totally horror movie dedicated podcasts. I'm certain that there's an entire genre there that a whole industry that you can lean into. Having said that, like in terms of longevity for our podcast, do I want to talk about something that I cannot talk about every single week? But yeah, there is legs to grow there. That's a certainty for sure.
Yeah, thanks. Pod sauce. The je ne sais quoi. Danderz, what do you think? What was your pod sauce?
I haven't prepared my sauce answer yet, but let me think, David. Do you know what? Just how well prepared you were, young man. You know, that's my sauce. You're my saucy man of the week, David. And,
I am your sauce.
I
it's
thank you
easy
for
when
that.
it's fun. Thank you. It's easy when it's fun. As I said, I enjoyed doing it, so it was made it a lot easier to bulk it out. Like to be honest, I didn't expect to have so much riffing involved in it. Like I had planned out 25 minutes, 30 max in my head, but like that was just section 1. So you could tell that
Scare.
yeah.
That's us.
Yeah.
How about you, Dino? What was your pod sauce?
You know, this might be a little bit surprising, but my pod sauce comes from anti-horror himself. That could be a good character, like anti-horror.
Anti-horror.
And I'm an old aunt, like I'm your mother's sister.
Yeah, anti-horror.
That's the character. Yeah. I don't know what I'm going to go with that, so I won't. But Danderz, I liked your pick for your favorite scene because, you know, it's not always about the payoff. It's about the build-up as well. It's about setting the scene. And I think that scene in not American Psycho. Is that?
Yeah, it is.
I always get American Psycho and Psycho mixed up in my head. And then
yeah.
it's Patrick Bateman and Norman Bates.
Yeah.
So it's very similar.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just sets up the movie perfectly. It sets up the theme. And it's like not necessarily scary, but it is incredibly unsettling.
It's chilling, yeah. And do you know what? Speaking about that, they probably did that on purpose. American Psycho is obviously it's a novel written in the 80s, and Psycho was a much earlier film, so it's probably a subtle nod. Do you know? I'm not certain about that, but it certainly could be. But yeah, no, thank you for that. I agree. Well said.
Yeah. So with that being said, we will go around the table, and you guys can tell me if it's a smash hit. Or should we just trash it? We'll start with you, Dino.
Well, let's get a little bit of tension building here. It's a smash hit for me.
Let's go.
Don't we need to say any more than that? You know I love it.
Yeah, I thought you might enjoy the old horror movie topics. Danderz, smash hit, trash the fucker.
Well, look, I mean, obviously it was a fun episode. There was a lot of value in the preparation. It was enjoyable to talk about, but I keep circling back to this point about do I want to be talking about horror movies every week when I am clearly not qualified, nor do I have the credentials to survive in that arena. But can you really call the show anything other than a smash hit? Because God damn it was an amazing show. It spooked the hell out of me.
They did. I'm actually still shivering from it. Wow.
Thanks, guys.
What a positive response. I wasn't expecting that at all, but you know, Dave always pulls something out of the hat. And with that resounding positive response, it is very much certain that the Ghastly Flicks podcast is a spooktacular smash hit. But at WSSAP, we like to hedge our bets. So until we can get this bad boy into production, we will continue plotting, pitching, and of course podding until we are certain we have the next pod smash on our hands. Any closing statements about your pod, Dave?
About my pod? Yeah, man, I'm sick and we couldn't do the final round, the final section. It was just for the listeners, encapsulate it all. It was a fun game. Maybe next time we do this podcast, we could play it. It was just a game of Guess Who. It was nice. It was fun.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Well, we look forward to hearing that next time. But unfortunately, that is all the time we have here today on We Should Start a Podcast. You can listen out for the Ghastly Flicks podcast coming soon exclusively to the explicitly not for vampires garlic aioli podcast app. If you think that we should start the Ghastly Flicks podcast, please rate, subscribe, and let us know at WSSAP Official on Instagram and X, formerly known as Twitter. That is WSSAP Official on Instagram and Twitter. We are inches away from a huge idea, and you can tune in again next week to hear us pitch that next hit show. And I am dying to hear it. Only joking. We hate Draculas. We fucking hate Draculas. We hate vampires.
If you've made it
what
to
do you
the
think,
end,
guys, about next week and then about vampires as well? Go in them one last time before we wrap this up.
Yeah, fuck vampires.
If I see a vampire, why I oughta, so.
Pow, straight in the kisser.
Ooh, that was very threatening. But until next time, everyone, please keep your ear to the grindstone and remember the haunting words of Dr. Loomis when a broken Laurie Strode inquired, "Was that the boogeyman?" about her masked terrorizer. As a matter of fact, Loomis replied, "It was a podcast." See you next time.